Better?
All right, why don't we go ahead and start? So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Anja Feldmann from Technical University of Berlin and Deutsche Telekom Labs. Is that the right term for it?
That's fine.
Anja and I know each other going way back from her work on particularly internet measurement, coinciding a lot with mine, and then her steady stream of excellent students who have come through IXP, some of whom have stayed, which has been terrific, and we continuing to develop on these talented students.
Well, Vern, thanks a lot for hosting me here today, and it's always a pleasure to be in Berkeley and to be able to work with you folks here. Now, what I want to do today is give you an overview what Internet exchange points are all about and some of the research work that we have been doing in this context, namely, to be more concrete, some of the work on AS interrelationships that we reported on last SIGCOMM, and also about IXPs as a vantage point, which will appear in this year's IMC. And so you see a whole bunch of people involved in this work, including Walter. A bit of history about IXPs. What are they all about? Well, the simple definition is it's a physical point where internet traffic can be exchanged. Of course, that sounds extremely simple, and you always need that. But where does it actually come from? It all started when, in North America, they decommissioned the NSFNET around 94, 95, and then kind of said, we want to have at least 4 network access points, and they are, in some sense, the predecessor to all of the internet exchanges. And so it then kind of grew, and by now there are more than 80 internet exchange points in the US. Who's actually heard about those internet exchange points? At lunch?
In the US.
In some sense, it's basically.
The NSA secret rooms are located?
I doubt that. But it basically tells you something about their non-importance. And I don't think they're that critical for today's internet operation, because the big carriers in the US, they basically do private peering among them. And so what the internet exchange points in some sense enable you is to have this layer 2 switch on which the ASs then come to interconnect may not be such a big necessity back over here in the US at this point. But in Europe, it kind of looks different. They also started NAP-like facilities there in 1990. And they had a different motivation. And their motivation was this astronomical transatlantic cost. And so if they were able to keep some of their traffic local, they could really save a lot of money. And because of that, they basically started a non-for-profit organization where a bunch of ISPs agreed, hey, we want to do this. We get together, we set up a switch, and we enable it to actually set all of these interconnection points. And so there are more than 150 IXPs, from huge to medium to small, and how big I will actually show you in a moment. Now, with regards to IXPs, the question is, what is it actually? And here, there's a whole meta-organization of all of the IXPs, which is this Euro IXPs, and they basically state it's a physical network infrastructure operated within a single entity for the purpose of exchanging internet traffic between autonomous systems. And the requirements for actually joining one of them is you must have an AS number, and you must have a clear and open policy for others to join. And basically, there should be at least 3 different ASs there that want to interconnect and then kind of be able to exchange traffic amongst each other. Now, I said they can go from small to medium to huge. And here's just to give some numbers. It's small, single switch in the basement. And it's basically in a local area, there are a couple of ISPs kind of just providing internet access, and why pay Deutsche Telekom the money if they can actually interchange the traffic locally? Put the switch in the basement or get there and exchange traffic. Or huge. And basically D6, for example, has 4 supernodes, highly secure, resilient data centers, uses Adva's flagship element, and they are basically were fighting who gets the first 100 gigabit switch so that they can offer 100 gigabit ports amongst each other. And that is something which is not small amount of traffic back here. Also with regard to distributed, some are single location, others can go up to 15 different sites. So they are not necessarily all located in one location. Indeed, some of them are branching out and saying, hey, we have this great business model, it works. Why don't we actually try to operate an IXP in Dubai? Or in some other location.
Does Asia have a European style use of IXPs, or is it US style, or is it just different?
I would guess it depends on the country, because it depends a bit on the political system. Now, of course, depending on how open the political system is, they may want to keep some of the traffic inside and be able to control some of the stuff that is happening. Or they may be just completely open, and so it differs. They are both there. Here's the infrastructure. And you can see that's actually fairly complicated. The elements over here, it's duplicated, fully redundant, and so even if some of the infrastructure fails, it's all still operable and working. So robust and with redundancy. And if you look at that kind of infrastructure, you will notice that it's probably capable of handling at least as much traffic as some of the big Tier-1 ISPs over here in the US are actually capable of handling. And it's not just one of them, there are a bunch of these. Now, what are some of the typical properties here? It's basically all Ethernet based, and Ethernet is fairly cheap, so it's actually somewhat scalable. Fully redundant, and the equipment housed in a reliable facility, so they have reliability, they have the power density, they have the security in terms of access, and all those kinds of things. And the requirements to actually go there is the AS number, and the way you do it is you physically ship a router to one of these facilities. It's going to be plugged in there. You then connect the cable to one of the ports of the infrastructure, and then you are able to set up any kind of peering session with any of the other members that is there. Which also, of course, means that it's really attractive for some guys to go to the big guys because there are already many other members there. Now, the only other thing you have to do is you have to agree to the IXP's general terms, and the router actually has to support BGP because they basically do BGP sessions in order to set up these things. Now, if you have to establish now a BGP session to each one of the 400 participants there, then it's going to be a lot of work. So in order to not have to do that, they actually have route servers, which are fairly complicated beasts, which enable them to have one BGP connection to the route server and then get the feeds from everybody that is willing to do open peering. And so that means that it's fairly easy and scalable to set up a huge number of BGP connections. Now, why peer? Well, it's basically to improve latency, bandwidth, fault tolerance, and the routing of the traffic, and it basically doesn't add cost. And so if you can find people that are willing to share, then you're good for it. Now, given this, would you expect the big tier ones to participate in this? Probably not, because they want to make money with transit traffic. But all the tier twos, they don't want to pay the tier ones, they are not competing with each other, so they want to actually take advantage of this infrastructure. And that's more or less what you will see.
So the IXPs could have, monetary arrangements. Doesn't have to be neutral pairing, right? But in practice,
they are neutral in the sense that they are offering the connectivity, and what people do among themselves, they don't care.
Okay, so the IXP is not involved in anything.
The
There
IXP.
still should be a deal worked out among ASs.
So the deal still has to be among the ASs. The IXPs are not involved in the deals. The IXP makes money by saying, hey, you want a 1 gig port? I take money for that. You want a 10G port? I take a bit more money for that.
It's basically a code.
Yeah, and I mean, usually like in many IXPs, you'll also have like at least some Tier-1 ISPs.
Yeah,
But
we'll get
it's
it.
a convenient point even for Tier-1 ISPs to get, customers from lower tier ISPs to buy the transit there.
Now, what you can of course also have is that once the router is there, doing a cable, a direct cable, is simple. And which policy you do on that cable, who cares? In some sense, the IXPs, they also don't care whether when you do establish a B2B session, do you pay the other for the traffic or not. So what we see is the connectivity, but given that most of the policies are open policies, most of these connections seem to be open peering. Now, each IXP more or less differs, whether it's for profit, not for profit, whether they are actually neutral in the sense that they're carrier neutral or co-location neutral, how the ownership and the management is set up, the exact fees differ, the scope of the activities, and the exact arrangements differ. And here we get back to the US versus the EU model, and it's more, I'm not saying that everybody in the US is for profit. I'm not saying that everybody in Europe is non-for-profit. It's just a dominant model. And so it seems that in the US, it's basically the co-location operator that operates both the co-location as well as the peering fabric. They offer differential pricing, can be spread among multiple facilities. They don't have to. But basically, much of it seems to be private peering with private cable and for profit in the sense that they don't publish a whole lot of information. These guys keep quiet. And then there's Equinix, which is also a fairly big operator. And you probably know them more as a data center company because it has more than 95 data centers in 31 major business markets. But actually, many of these supposedly also host IXP facilities. With over 900 network service providers and 4,000 networks actually connecting to these and providing the inter-peering relationship. We were actually a bit surprised by how big they are. But finding exact data is difficult. So they are an internet exchange, IXPs Ethernet exchange, and they offer cross connects, but they seem to mainly focus on the cross connects. In Europe, it's basically separate contracts with a co-location provider and the IXP operator most of the time. And everybody pays the same published fees. The fee just depends on the port speed. It's not separate contracts which are there for each one of the different ASs. They're usually operated by a formal association, typically a set of ISPs that just kind of will say, hey, let's get together and do it. These days, often spread across multiple co-location facilities, and they are public information, and they make tons of data available, and they are fairly open for also research interactions. And we have had good interactions with multiple of these IXPs, and we have a working relationship with one. We are working on extending it to involve also a small Greek IXP as well as another medium-sized IXP. So their main point is they want to offer service for the common good. They really want to basically reduce the transit costs, improve network performance, with that give a boost to the local internet economy, have more international bandwidth for the stuff that is important. Be good is more or less the attitude of those guys. And because that's the attitude, that's where the openness comes from. And that's why they're very willing to work with people. DE6, a local powerhouse, I would say. It was founded in '95, one location, started with 3 ISPs, and is run with a non-for-profit organization. Today, 5 different locations within Frankfurt, 18 data centers, providing 1 gigabit to 100 gigabit ports, more than 500 members, 15 petabytes per day. Huge. And this is basically the traffic growth that they will have. So it's basically down here to more than, or close to 2 terabytes towards the end of 2012. And it's not the only one that is as big. Here's the data for AM6, the Amsterdam Internet Exchange. It was also one location in Amsterdam, 94. 96, 97, 20 ISPs and carriers founded the AM6 IXP Foundation, which actually runs this. Again, a foundation. Today, more than 580 members, 15 petabytes per day, provides ports from 1 to multiple 100 gigs, 12 co-location facility, Amsterdam area. Huge. Now, what drives them? That we see these kinds of growth rates here. 50 to 100% more traffic yearly, 10 to 20% new members each year, and all of this. It's the simplicity. It's the fact that they always offer new services, that it makes it simple to interconnect and saves money in other places, and it's priced very reasonable. And it's priced reasonable, so it just has to cover the cost of the local operations. Here is how the number of IXPs has changed over time. And so 99, 2011, and so you see North America, Europe, Asia, it's also growing. It's basically all of the major regions have one. Latin America and Africa on a much smaller scale. But it's coming. Now, if we have that, we can of course start to look at what do we know, what don't we know. So it's generally known that we have more than 350 IXPs located at all these various different locations. What may not be as much known that there are up to 500 or even more ASs at these IXPs. And you have them kind of in terms of number of ASs, AM6, Frankfurt, London Exchange, Moscow Exchange, Netherlands, Equinix Paris, Equinix Zurich, Swiss IX, and some of them have a fairly large number of unique AS numbers. Some of the ISPs are at multiple of these.
What do you mean by unique?
They are only at this single IXP. They are not at other IXPs. So in some sense, the ones that are unique are probably the really local ones. But a lot of the ASs actually go to multiple of these IXPs. Here, the distribution of IXP member ASs per region. And here you also see, of course, that there are many more different ASs in Europe than, let's say, in the US. Not that this region is larger, but because of political reason, it's more complicated.
What's kind of the current number of ISs out there? Like, curious.
43,000.
So a quarter of them are at least one ISP.
Yeah. Here is the amount of traffic volume at ARM6, as it is grown from almost nothing in 2003 to more than 24 petabytes on a regular basis. And it's really the case. If you look at the stats that AT&T publishes about the traffic that they carry overall on their network on a single day, it's less than what these guys carry. What we don't know is the number of peerings at these IXPs and how it compares to the total number of peerings that we see in the internet. And so that was one of the questions. And so basically, in terms of the number of peering links, there was some prior work in 2010 that estimated it from BGP data at roughly 20,000. Some targeted trace routes was at 40,000, and targeted data plane measurements that try to increase and find even more diverse paths in the AS topology was at roughly 60,000. Now, what did we do? We worked with one of the large European internet exchange points and wanted to find out what does the data tell us. So a bit of information about peering fabric, then the member diversity, then some of the traffic, and what visibility do IXPs give us as vantage points of the overall internet. So we basically working with the major European IXP, and we have many months of S-flow data. Now, who knows what S-flow is? Nobody? It basically is a the first 128 bytes of every single packet. Well, not of every single packet because it's sampled. And in this case, 1 out of every 16K packets, the packet header is actually collected. And this basically is how it looks like. You have the various different ASs that interconnect via the switching fabric. And in the switching fabric, you have an S-flow collector that collects all of this data over here. And we basically get a copy of this data.
Is the 1 in 16,000 pseudo-random?
Yeah.
Is there any?
At least I believe it is. I can double check.
Any calibration on knowing it doesn't drop? I mean, I wouldn't think so because that's a low rate, but
the rate is not
still would
that
be
big.
Nice to know for sure.
It's hard to tell for sure. But the way that I know how they are managing their infrastructure, it would highly surprise me if on the connecting link here, there would be major drops. And it's very hard to validate these things because the sampling rate of 1 to 16K is so large that understanding that there is absolutely no drop is almost impossible. Now, we did do some consistency checks in the sense that we checked for duplicates. We also filtered out the IXP management traffic, the broadcast, the multicast traffic, except for ARP and some of the other things. And also, we didn't look as much as at IPv6 because it's, at this point, less than 1% of the traffic.
I'm guessing it's not a lot less than 1% though, right?
It's increasing, but at a small rate.
Yeah, but it's not like, 1 in 10,000.
No.
And duplicates, what causes those?
Because if you have the same flow going through two switches that are monitoring and the same packets, then you could have duplicates. But we basically don't see any of those. So that you don't.
1 in 16,000 of your samples ought to get duplicated.
They actually have some intelligence in their monitoring.
Oh, that worries me. I would rather they just sit around. Actually, that's strange.
They seem to be doing something smart here.
Not pseudo-random. That would imply it's like some sort of seeded thing that's exactly the same in both or something.
I would have to double check, but basically they did do a lot of the groundwork here.
Do they not want to be identified? I noticed you didn't identify them.
I don't know for sure. So I much rather say a large European internet exchange point, but
So in
I
your
think
paper, you won't acknowledge them specifically?
you may find some more specific acknowledgements there. But I still prefer to talk about it like this.
Fine.
The inference isn't hard.
What?
The inference isn't hard.
Now, in terms of the member ASs, you see it going from 358 to 375 to kind of a 396 over time. And of course, this is publicly available information. And so it would be easy for you guys to reverse engineer exactly which one we are talking about.
Can you go back to the slides with the number of ASs of large European?
No, I don't do that yet at this point.
But this is all 2012 or what?
This was 2012. 2013, it has increased to something like a little bit, but not drastically. But this was the data slide that I had handily available, so I used this. Actually, no, this was 2011.
Okay.
Notice I said that the tier ones may not be that interested. They are actually still present because it's still a good place to do contracts and to actually do some of the peering. In terms of leaf ASs, those are the ASs that don't offer any transit, and we basically put all of the other ones into tier 2. Because the distinguishing tier 3, tier 4 versus tier 2 is quite difficult, and we didn't want to get into that. And so the leaves are basically some of your big content providers. Now, in terms of the countries, they are not limited to a single country, nor in terms of the continents over here.
How are you associating a country with the AS?
You're basically finding out where the main location in the WHOIS database for that AS is actually located.
So a single country per AS.
Yeah. Now, we also went for all of the ASs to their web pages and tried to classify whether they are access, content, hosting, servers, transit providers, CDNs, etc. And it's basically a lot of the access, hosting services, other network service, transit service. And of course, some of these ASs provide more than a single one of these. That's why the percentages don't add up to 100%.
Can you say a little bit more about what does classifications mean? Like, so I mean, some of them are fairly obvious, but service versus host, like service versus hosting.
I would have to look them up. It doesn't really matter that much. The point I want to make here is there's some diversity here. What we will look at later on are large internet service provider, smaller internet service providing, hosting, and academic networks. Here is what I mentioned with regards to tier 1 ISPs not being that important. If you look at the overall traffic statistics, then you will find that if this is the total amount of traffic here, the top curve, then most of it is between the tier 2s. Tier 1s on this level are not that contributing that much traffic here. It's the tier 2s that are exchanging the traffic.
So what does this classification mean? When is traffic tier 1 if it involves one tier 1?
Yeah. If it involves a leaf, it's that. Then it's actually the leaf.
Okay, so it's like, so it's basically like if it involves the leaves, it's leaf. If it involves the tier 1, it's tier 1. Otherwise, it's tier 2.
Yeah.
And it's midnight Central European time or whatever.
Yep.
So,
That's funny. So things peak in the evening.
Yep.
I would say that it's like home video and stuff as opposed to daytime businesses.
It's definitely not daytime business traffic. It's a lot of the content that you see, not necessarily video.
That's also consistent with what we've seen at the, the large ISP for broadband internet study. That was also like a peak at between 8 and 9 p.m.
Yeah, that's an ISP.
Yeah.
So that, yeah. So.
Yep.
It's still interesting.
Why is the tier 2 and leaf traffic so much more dependent on day of time than the tier 1 traffic? Why is the tier 1 traffic almost flat?
Because there isn't that much. If you look at it on a relative basis, if you would enlarge it, you would still see the peak in the evening.
So it's just that the bottom line is not 0 but minus something.
It's just barely above 0.
Okay.
So there is some traffic, but not that much.
I didn't read the question correctly.
So negative traffic is of course not possible.
Yeah, it's just that the bottom line is not 0.
Yeah. So what about the peering fabric? So we basically said that there is peering between two ASs if we actually see BGP traffic and IP traffic being exchanged. And we know the two Ethernet ports that are involved, and for that we can actually associate it with the appropriate ASs.
So the S flow is giving you the port?
It gives us the Ethernet MAC addresses.
Do it off of MAC.
It doesn't give us the port, but the MACs, which are not bad.
Yeah, no, MAC seems fine.
Oh, in terms of the number of potential links, when you have had something like 396 links, you would have 396 times 395 divided by 2, 78 possible of these peering links. Now, what we actually saw was something like more than 500,000 peering links, which means a peering rate of almost 60%.
That's bizarre. Just would have thought most of them have a few peers, because managing hundreds, what a headache.
In June 2012, we had 420 members and more than 55 peering links.
So, but you above, you mentioned, well, if you only see BGP traffic, then it's a backup.
Exactly.
So how much, do you have those numbers?
Yeah, we will get to those.
Okay. And it also seems like I could picture occasional weird stuff. You'd really like to know, is the volume?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Also, do you get to identify protocols?
Yes.
Well, you have enough data for that, so yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Keep going.
So let's just take it, and at this point, a single IXP, 50,000 peering links, 10 large European IXPs, maybe 160 peering links, 40,000 more from some of the other, ignoring everything else, you would get something completely different than what we have currently have had. So it's a different order of magnitude. Now the question is, why the heck didn't we see this before? What does it mean? What kind of traffic do we see? And all of these other interesting questions.
Good.
Now, how come we didn't see them before? What you want to do is compare it to the data sets that have been used before. And so we basically did get the route view data. We get to look at the write data, the BGP data, the non-public data from 723 ASs that we have access to. We joined them, and if you do that, then you get roughly 20 to 30K peerings. With the trace route data, you get roughly, that we actually got access to via some of our friends, we got 40 to 45K, and you can join all of this together, and at that point you have data from about 1,000 ASs. Keep in mind, at this IXP, you already have 400 different ASs. So it's actually, even in that sense, you already have lots of data points. Now, what you can do with that, you can, of course, ask yourself, which fraction of the peering links that we are seeing did we also see in the route view data? Which fraction did we not see, or where can we not be 100% sure? And basically, route view, you only see a fairly small fraction of roughly 10 to 12%. RIPE, you see something like above 20. The private data, about 10. If you join all of them, you see roughly 25%. If you add to that the traceroute data, then you get to roughly 30% of the links that you don't see. And they, with all the available data sets that we had, they remained invisible. Now, what about the traffic? Is it actually relevant how much the traffic that we have, or is all of the traffic on this 30% and we can ignore these 70%? 43% of the exchanged bytes would have remained invisible if we hadn't looked at these additional peering links. So it's significant. So they do actually exchange traffic. Now, you asked, don't these ASs, why the heck do they have so many different peers? How do they manage? And for that, we looked at the various different business types. We look at large ISPs, small ISPs, hosters and CDNs, and academic networks, and we will distinguish them. And we will look at how many different peers each one of them have. Here is the number of peers for the 400 different members, sorted to the large ISPs, small ISPs, hosting and CDNs, and the academic networks. The tier 1s have a fairly small number of peers. The tier 2s, whether they are list, whether they are sys, whether they're hosters or CDNs, have a large number of members. Actually, almost all of them. And the reason that this is not so difficult to maintain is because of the route server that these guys offer. You have one BGP connection, you set up the right policy, and you get all of the routes.
Does that mean the route server has logs that would let you know who's pairing with it?
Yes.
Anyway?
So if you want to use the route server functionality, but you're still free to selectively peer with some AS.
Yes.
Right? It's interesting.
And you have your leaves. And also the leaves want to actually typically do with lots of them. Why are some below here? Because of maybe of their policy, maybe because they are just starting, maybe because they are just turning the stuff down. There are always cases of all kinds.
An interesting question is why would ISPs peer with each other, so I can kind of see, but especially leaves and to some degree hosting content providers are customers for traffic, right? So maybe content providers not so much. Definitely leaves you could see as customers of a tier 2 ISP, right?
No. Some of these leaves here are the big guys, the Google, the Akamais, etc. They have their own AS, and they actually, Google's policies these days is, hey guys, come to the IXPs and interconnect there. Indeed, some of them actually require it.
For content providers, I can see that. For enterprise customers, not so much.
True.
I'm still not following the x-axis. How do you pick?
These are all the various different members just sorted in according to tier 1, tier 2s, and leaves.
Well, but they're not sorted because you've got the like two different. Oh, I see. Some of the small ISPs are leaves.
Yeah.
Some of them are tier 2.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
So most members have large number of peers, yet they all still differ significantly. So here, this is the percentage of HTTP and HTTPS traffic just according to port 80 and port 443 classification. And this is kind of a CDF of the number of members with regards to their percentage. And while the overall percentage of HTTP traffic is roughly at 60%, it differs. There are some which hardly have any HTTP traffic, and there are others that have a lot, that are basically only HTTP traffic. You see all variants here, which basically means saying that all ISPs behave like the same is not true.
But the academic networks seem to be relatively homogeneous. Is that because it's just a smaller number? Or
Correct. You can also look at what is the geographic distance between the two IP addresses that are actually exchanging traffic. And you can look at the hoster, the large and the small guys. And no, this is not accurate on 10 kilometers in any kind of fashion. It comes with all of the bias of geolocation and the incorrectness of any of these kinds of things. So don't take it as absolutely truth. It's just an indication that a lot of the traffic actually stays within Europe. Some goes a little bit farther. And it also indicates that the hosters and CDNs are definitely sometimes sending the traffic cross ocean.
At 9,000, that basically means California.
Yeah.
Got about 10 minutes.
Now, with regards to the traffic, you see the typical time of day effects. But what's more interesting is probably traffic classification and some of the traffic diversity that you see. So none of the typical classification methods of just doing port-based, payload-based, flow feature or host feature actually works in itself. Because we have sampled S-flow, 1 out of 16K, only 128 bytes, and for 83 or 74% of the TCP UDP flows, we see only a single packet. So our approach, or actually Philip's approach, is to combine all of it. So if you want to know more about that, the guy that knows is sitting right there. Now, what you can do is you can use the payload signature to do the classification, then figure out which are servers and what are the services being offered, then use known port numbers, then figure out who is the BitTorrent speaker, which other traffic is being exchanged between those BitTorrent speakers, and what is exchanged between the clients and servers that you've identified. And with that, you get roughly to a classification rate of 94%, which is significantly higher than what I've seen before.
So the biggie is known server endpoint. Right? That's more than half of your.
Yes.
And that means this is an endpoint that we figured out in the past using something other than known server.
Basically, the payload signatures allow you to classify a lot of the servers. And with that, you can move on. Because if you know that a certain IP address and port is offering web services, then basically a lot of the other traffic going there is also likely to be web traffic and other things like that. If you do that, this is your application mix that comes out. A lot of HTTP, RTMP, other known, BitTorrent, likely BitTorrent, peer-to-peer likely, and the remaining unknown. Now the question is, does this application mix differ if you take different subsets of the traffic from different kinds of inter-AS links? So basically, if you sort the members according to how much traffic do they contribute overall and take them from the top, you may see something different than when you take them from the bottom. And that is true. If you take all, this was the application mix. If you only take your top contributor, you get more HTTP. If you take them from the bottom, you get less HTTP and more BitTorrent.
What's top and bottom here? Like size of the AS or?
AS sorted by the amount of traffic exchanged over the IXP platform. No, this is not AS pair.
So the top
ASs.
So the top is the AS that exchange the most amount of traffic.
Correct.
Okay.
And so you pick the number of ASs till you get 30% of the overall traffic.
Okay.
And it basically says that the top guys are HTTP heady. The bottom parts are non-HTTP happy. And if you pick something from everybody, some intermediate mix, then you get closer to the overall picture. So it basically says that finding representative subset, you need to be smart in order to do so if you want to do subselection. But actually, what about IXPs as vantage points? What do we see? What do we miss? And here is, for a single week, last year, week 45, 2012, we saw this many IP addresses, this many different ASs, this many subnets, and this many countries. Yes?
No.
For all traffic. If you look at only server traffic, we saw this many server IPs, this many ASs which are hosting, this many subnets, this many countries.
For those IPs, how do you weed out that there wasn't like a SYN flooding attack or something?
We don't at this point.
I guess the sampling would mean it wouldn't be as egregious as it might have been.
Right now, when we mention IP, it's exactly that IP. Now, in terms of the IPs, there are 2 to the 32. This is still a large fraction of them. 43K, 42, 450K, almost all of them. Here, we don't know the ground truth in terms of how many server networks are actually out there. And for somebody to have been identified as a server, we definitely weed out the net tags. Now, we focus on the commercial traffic. We actually identify the server IPs, and we actually cluster them according to the organization that is responsible for the traffic. And for that, we use lots of various different sets of information. Whoever is interested in that, look at the paper. Let's just assume that we were able to actually do it. Now, why are we interested in that? What we notice is that the ASs actually belong to different organizations. Some of the ASs host servers from many different organizations. Others from only a single one. Now, who is actually responsible for the overall traffic flow? Is it the ASs or is it the organizations from whom your servers are actually being hosted? Who are the players? And basically, what we're looking at here is roughly 2/3 of the overall traffic. And so the question is, shouldn't we be looking at the owners of the servers rather than at the ASs where the traffic is actually hosted at? And today's assumption would be more like, okay, these guys over here, well, they are shaping it because that's where most of the servers are, but this is definitely not necessarily the case. So it goes down to the question, if we have the different IXP over here, and we have clients here, and we have, let's say, Akamai server, and let's say Google caches here. Who is shaping this? What kind of traffic are we assuming? Is the Akamai traffic always coming from the Akamai AS, or is it actually coming from somewhere else? It may very well be that the Akamai traffic is actually not coming here from Akamai, but it's actually coming from a server in a different AS. And so we were asking the question, which fraction of the traffic is actually coming from, let's say, Akamai, and which fraction of the traffic is coming from somewhere else? Here, for that, you see, first of all, the number of servers that these guys have versus the number of ASs that they actually have servers in. And you see a huge heterogeneity. There are some, such as Akamai, that has servers, huge number of servers in a huge number of organizations. But they are not the only one. A huge number of ASs. So you have others here, even small, that have smaller number of servers, but still huge number of organizations.
Where does Google fall in there roughly?
Ooh. No, I don't remember, to be honest. I would have to look at the core data. In terms of per AS, there are ASs such as SoftLayer, which if you look at the number of organizations they host, it's huge. And they also have lots of servers there. And so anywhere you look at, you have lots of heterogeneity. Now, what about the traffic flows? So for a member AS, how much fraction does come from the Akamai servers, and what fraction comes from non-Akamai servers? What would be your guess, guys? 10%? 20%? Should most of the traffic come from the Akamai AS?
80 from non-Akamai.
So percent of Akamai traffic on the Akamai link, on the link that they are actually having with Akamai, and it goes somewhere between 0 fraction, 20% to 100%. So for some ASs, all of the traffic is coming indeed from the Akamai AS. For others, there's zero amount of traffic, even though there's significant traffic coming from that AS. And so basically, even though this member AS has a peering connection with the Akamai AS, a lot of the traffic is coming from some other AS, which basically means that the implication that there is peering, and so most of the traffic from this member AS should actually come from the Akamai AS, is not true. And this is not just true for Akamai, this is also true for other ASs. So we could have a similar graphic here for quite a number of different ASs. So what does it mean? It means we should actually change our mental model. This is a typical AS picture that you have found in textbooks. This is what you found from when you listened to Craig Leibowitz and co. The hypergiants are actually at the tier 1 level, more or less here. They are as important, and in our sense, they were the leaf networks. Now, it's flat, the hierarchy is flattening, but what about these IXPs? And basically, my claim is they are actually a central component of the whole internet because of their size. They're at least as big as those guys up there, and they are enabling a lot of the exchange of this kind of data here. They're also a great vantage point because you can pretty much see at least traffic from almost all IPs and almost all ASs, even though some of the, if you kind of correlate it by volume, there's more of the local volume because of the distances. But still, you can see a huge fraction of the internet here. You also know that there's logs peering. It's a rich fabric. And the AS topology is even flatter than assumed. And the AS view is outdated. You really need an organizational point of view, because these organizations are placing the servers in all of these various different ASs, that if you look at the traffic flows, it's not AS to AS that matters. It's actually organization to clients that matters. Proposing that one should look at. And with that, I want to actually finish here. Questions?
So was HTTPS around 5 to 10% of web traffic in general?
Yep.
That's by bytes.
This by bytes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see an increase over time?
Yes.
Significant?
What you call significant? But there is an increase in HTTPS, yes.
At the cost of HTTP or other things?
I guess that it was at the cost of other things, because HTTP is also like steadily increasing, and HTTPS as well. So basically, it must be at cost of other protocols.
So the thinking that IXPs give you this really quite nice vantage point, would that be true also for a US IXP?
It depends how large it is. But it could be. Would be nice to actually compare the two.
Yeah.
I just don't have the contacts to the US IXPs. I know the guys in Europe here better.
Bill Norton at Equinix? I seem to recall him wanting to facilitate measurement of US IXPs.
Could be. There's also a first attempt to open one of these non-for-profit IXPs in the US.
Yeah.
And we are right now exploring what something like that might do to the overall internet traffic shape over here in the US.
Good. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys.